All right, it's 12 o'clock. Got a lot of content to go through, and hopefully we can get to some questions. If you are not sure, we're going to be discussing the most important Agile role no one is talking about, in my humble opinion. And here we go. Right, so we're going to give you a little bit about my background. We're going to discuss kind of, is failure the new norm? Address a common vocabulary, so we're all speaking off the same music as it relates to the product owner and the manager roles within an Agile organization, particularly in the government. We're going to talk about organizational and cultural challenges, discuss the need to pivot to customer centricity as led by the PO and the product manager. We'll discuss responsibilities and how they apply. And then we'll discuss some lean Agile principles to aid in the POPM to be successful, and then some success factors specific to government. And hopefully we can tie it all together in the end. This was me probably 2.5 years ago prior to COVID. Look how I had gel in my hair. I was clean shaven. I had a tie on and a jacket. And this is how I walk the hallways of many of my clients. Fast forward many months of sitting in this particular office, and you can see I'm unshaven and I no longer do the gel in my hair. I did put a collared shirt on, as I did for this picture. But I work for a company called Digital Polygon. We do a lot of content management, open source content management work, both in the public sector and the private sector. The COO and the chief agilist, and that's all important. If you want to get in touch with me, there are some of my, I'm sure they'll share these later, but this is how you get in touch with me in the future. Over the course of the last 2 decades, I've had the opportunity to work for some really large organizations as well as some really small ones. I won't talk about each one, but I started my career working at the Department of Commerce for BAE Systems on a help desk. Tier 1, Tier 2, it wasn't very well process oriented, but we were hands-on, talking to customers and solving problems on a regular basis. I spent some time at Accenture and Microsoft, all federally focused, and then eventually became Publicis, Sapient at the time, Government Services CTO, because I came up the technology track. That said, the second part of my career, particularly at Sapient, ICF, Creative Systems and Consulting, and now Digital Polygon, I'm more of an organizational change management guy that really got into enterprise Agile adoption. And it's kind of funny how I got there. Over the last 21 plus years, I've put 850,000 plus miles on a variety of cars, sitting in about 3 hours of traffic each day to get back and forth to and from work and my client sites. That excludes trains, Ubers, cabs, and metro rides, and I am sure there's just a handful of people on this call that can completely relate. All right. So I started thinking 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, working 48 weeks out of a 52-week year. That's 720 hours or 18 weeks of sitting in a car. So I can tell you that I much enjoy the time I've gotten back working remotely, but at the same time, I miss actually interfacing, having human interface with my clients and having regular conversations, as well as my teammates. So it's an interesting dilemma we've all had to overcome, and congratulations to everyone who has. Over those 2 decades, I have worked across a variety of agencies. I already talked about commerce, but I also worked in the intelligence space at NGA, CIA, DIA, pivoted over while at Microsoft, working for mostly the US Department of Homeland Security at a number of different agencies. Went over to Sapient, where I really did a lot of supporting of more Fed civilian agencies. And most lately, the customers I've worked with has been the Small Business Administration and the USDA. So with all of that, I have seen my shares of successes and my shares of failures, right? What is failure the norm, particularly on large projects? If you do some searches on government IT failures, you start to see headlines like this, right? We talk about healthcare.gov, a well-documented failure, at least when it was first rolled out, that has since recovered. And we're gonna do a little bit more in just a sec. But as you can see, the headlines aren't pretty, right? And 5 government projects that are costing us billions. Secure Border Initiative, an older initiative from the 2011 timeframe, actually had $1 billion spent $1 billion, had nothing much to show for it, and that's through 2 different contractors. Why does that happen? Right? We abandon projects occasionally, or they prolong and don't have much to show for it over time. So why is that, right? So as of this morning, this is the CIO risk ratings for investments on the IT dashboard. CIOs of executive departments and certain agencies actually have to update this on a regular basis. As you can see, as of today, 54.2% of projects are either high risk or medium risk, and only 45.8% are actually low risk. Why? Like, why is that, right? And I wonder, because I know how the system works. I have some CPIC background, and I know that although this looks kind of objective, the way they get to these numbers isn't always as objective as we want it to be, or qualitative. It's more qualitative than quantitative. So therefore, these numbers could actually be worse. And to prove that, I'm going to go back to 2010, where the Standish Group has a chaos database, they call it. And from 2010 to 2014, this was the state we were in, right? 87% of large government projects were either challenged and or failed, right? That's a staggering number if you think about the type of money involved. So I keep asking, and sitting in my car all those times over the years, I continue to ask one fundamental question. Under what circumstances are government IT projects the most successful? Right now, this is the world according to Bill. However, we're going to try to back it up with some data, right? In Bill's humble opinion, after 20 plus years of doing this, right, there are three scenarios where I have seen a tremendous success in very short amount of time as it relates to government projects, right? Emergent situations being the first and foremost, right? This includes natural disaster response. I was around during Sandy. I was around, during various hurricanes. Obviously, the most recent one is COVID, and I know that there were some rapid responses that many agencies had to adhere to and actually pull off in short order. And boy, did they! And we should celebrate those, but we also should learn why they were so successful in such short time frames to be able to learn from them. Right? Abject failures, particularly very public ones, and that's the healthcare.gov, and we're going to dive a little deeper into that in just a sec. And then mandates, be it executive or congressional, and they're often in response to either of the above, right? And I'll use COVID as an example. There was congressional laws that were passed that enabled the PPP program that Small Business Administration had to implement practically in a matter of a couple of weeks, which would have typically taken 6 to 18 months. They did it in 2-3 weeks. Was it a perfect rollout? No, but they were dependent on legacy systems that were never designed to meet the type of demand that PPP generated. So it's amazing how much success government agencies can have during these situations. And why is that? Well, it's because A, they are hyper-focused. Everyone knows the goal. They know there's basically a deadline that needs to be met. People are waiting. Lives are at stake, right? Everyone understands those goals. There are priorities. There's funding, and all impediments are moved out of the way. So it's something to take into consideration as we continue this conversation. All right. But why is this? So if you go to the HHS OIG, healthcare.gov, right? And now this is them, not Bill's opinion. This is what the OIG over at healthcare.gov or HHS rather had to say about their own healthcare.gov experience, right? There was an absence of clear leadership, which caused delays in decision-making and a lack of clarity in project tasks. A lack of clarity in project tasks means there wasn't a lot of prioritizing going on. They were devoting too much time to developing policy. We can't change the policies, right? In this case, they were actually developing policy that was going to drive many of the decisions that were made, and they were slow and behind on that, which caused delays on the website development efforts. That said, there are policies in place that we must adhere to in government that are unique to government, be it laws and or mandates that often challenge us, but we're not going to address those as part of this conversation today. There was a culture problem, right? It was poor coordination between the policy team and the technical teams, but there was also failing obvious patterns of failure and signs of trouble that were basically being said that, yeah, everything's okay. And in my mind, they probably didn't have working software to prove that things were working the way expected, and they were saying that things were probably in pretty good shape. So after the launch, obviously, I think they had the initial launch had 6 people actually sign up for healthcare.gov, and then the system crashed, and that's when the news broke, and that's when CMS had a pivot, and they did a really nice job of it, right? And the two main factors that the OIG came up with was they adopted a badgers culture, which was it wasn't a contractors versus government type of thing. We were one team. We worked together. We listened to each other, and we got things done. And then, most importantly, in my opinion, there was ruthless prioritization going on, and I love that. And they even quoted it, that aligned the work effort so that everyone knew what needed to be done next. And things were prioritized on an ongoing basis so that as things change, requirements change, because they often do, they were ready for it. And they recovered in approximately 2 months. So it was a Herculean effort at the time, and lots of lessons learned from that. And we'll circle back on this in just a bit, right? So when you're ever talking about product owners and product managers, you have to kind of understand the difference between titles and roles, right? In government in particular, We often have lots of titles, both on the contracting side as well as the government side, but a title is simply a label you have within your company or organization based on the position you hold, right? I might have a vice president, but that doesn't really say what I actually do. My role is what I actually do regardless of my title. So I have been an SPC, I have been a Scrum Master of Scrum Masters, I have been an architect across my career, and those responsibilities, regardless of what my title was, those were the roles I fulfilled. All right. So some common old school, I'll call it late titles we need to understand and roles we need to understand within the government, because we hear and see them all the time. This is according to the Project Management Institute, the program manager. They can be thought of as the super project manager. They have responsibility for typically a portfolio of projects. They're really strategic in thinking. They're operational in nature. And ultimately, it's about transforming through these projects, transforming the mission of the organization to realize those benefits and to realize the goals that the organization sets, or what the mission is achieving the mission. At the project manager level, they play a lead role in planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing projects. Project Management Institute is kind of pivoting to change agents for them, which is great. However, historically, it's been about that planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing projects. In other words, projects have fixed schedules, a distinct start time, distinct end time. They have fixed budgets oftentimes, and this is how we've managed projects historically. They have lots of tools in their tool belt, right, as it relates to solving complex problems and independent activities. But ultimately, they say there's not a one size can fit all project, which is a very true statement. Every project has its own life, right? So before I move into the most critical roles in Bill's opinion, I want to give some love to my Scrum Masters on the call. Scrum Masters are fantastic. Like I said, I have been a Scrum Master in my career at times. I've been Scrum Master of Scrum Masters. And this little Dilbert just to make you jiggle, to giggle, not jiggle, but giggle. Scrum Master has got a critical role in the organization. I actually think it's generally well understood within an Agile organization, including the government. They're all really about the servant leaders. There's nothing, right? They're about removing obstacles, coaching the team, getting the most out of the team, and removing impediments as necessary. They're also, they're known as Agile gurus and are well respected in most organizations. Product managers, on the other hand, are responsible for defining and supporting the building of desirable, feasible, viable, and sustainable products that meet customer needs over the product market lifecycle. And that product market lifecycle is really something we need to take into consideration, because in the government, we build these systems as projects with fixed schedules and fixed budgets, yet they live sometimes in infinitum, right? We have legacy systems that are 20, 30 plus years old that are still helping us run the government. So if that's the case, we actually have to plan for updating them on an ongoing basis. And product managers are the strategic thinkers, right? And in my opinion, the second most overlooked, underfunded, and misunderstood Agile role in government. Product owners are full-time members of the Agile team, right? And they own the backlog, defining the stories, prioritizing for the team on an ongoing basis, the backlog, so that we can actually deliver on a regular basis. It is one person and not a committee. And the most, in my opinion, overlooked, underfunded, misunderstood Agile role in government. When I look back across my career, even the lack of full-time product owners on development teams was really why we struggled. And I'm going to explain just a little bit why. So we also have organizational and cultural changes that we have to take into consideration, right? We have interagency challenges, right? Where we have mission execs, mission contractors, mission PMO, we have OCIO contractors, agency executives, and a plethora of others, all kind of siloed in their day-to-day jobs and struggle at times because they're not committed to the product owner and product management roles. And what I mean by not committed is they're not allocated, they're underfunded, therefore they're not allocated full time to those roles. We struggle to organize, to make progress, to deliver, and ultimately innovate and adapt, right? But this also happens inter-team wise, right? We have project managers, architects, business analysts, design teams, developers, and testers, for example, that sometimes are different contracts, sometimes are outside of your team and we're dependent on them. Sometimes we're interlaced in Agile teams, and that's great, but it causes the organizational structure causes us to struggle to deliver at times and it makes it very difficult. Right. We also have some legacy, I'll call it waterfall-like processes that are still part of the process. And I don't care if that's the investment process, the early, the capital planning and investment control process, which is very PMI centric, or if it's SDLC processes within the organization, although they're being updated on a regular basis, those policies still are rooted in kind of this waterfall or sequential approach. Right? Yet we're trying to deliver an agile methodology while still hitting stage gate reviews and doing all the things that are, and ATOs and things that are part of this kind of life cycle process that is waterfall in nature. Right? And it is why we fail to consistently deliver results, because we're trying to do agile development constrained by legacy processes that in some agencies are being updated, but in others are still kind of left to old devices. Right? And then what happens? So as we start to struggle as organizations, we're very siloed in our approach. We all get in a meeting and it gets very political, very bureaucratic, right? We don't always prioritize because it's a turf battle. The mission teams are pointing at the OCO, the OCO is pushing at the missions, the contractors pointing at the government's pointing at the contractors, right? It's this vicious cycle that often happens, right? We end up not managing risk because we're not even sure what all the risk is. And, we might identify some, but we're not identifying all because we're not communicating effectively. Right. And then we struggle to produce value. And we've all been in these conversations over the years. Right. And then manual processes, right? If this is in organizations, and I know there's a big effort to do CI/CD, to do DevOps, but the reality is there's still a lot of manual processes which inject a lot of poor quality into systems, right? Human beings, we make mistakes. And this is why we struggle to build in quality, because processes are always changing. Not everyone's on the same page. We're planning in different groups, and it's really hard to actually build out processes that everyone can leverage if we're actually executing independently. So in a nutshell, organizational cultural challenges we need to address are organizational silos, ineffective, often sequential planning and budgeting, lack of prioritization, risk identification, and identification of inter and intra-team dependencies, and then those pesky manual processes that introduce both risk and certain failures at times, right? So one way to deal with this is really taking a customer-centric approach, because a happy customer ultimately, and a customer in this case can be an employee. Depending on the systems we're building in government, they can be employee-facing, they can be civilian-facing, they could be warfighter-facing. It just depends on who you work for and where you work within the federal government, or the state government or local government as well. But ultimately, the end customer, the end user of the system is really the customer. And taking a customer-centric approach is one way for the entire organization to really start to help themselves provide better value moving forward, right? And for those that don't understand customer centricity at a very high level, every decision we make must be focused on driving value to the customer, right? So it's shifting from building systems and understanding what the customer actually needs, right? And I think this is a challenge from a acquisition perspective, but it is what it is, right? We like to define as many of our requirements up front, but the reality is requirements are changing all the time. And in order to take a customer-centric approach, we need to accept that and understand that the requirements that we gathered as part of the process have probably changed by the time we've actually awarded contracts to get things built. If we're building things internally with internal teams, fantastic. However, requirements are changing, people's needs are changing. And in order to provide value, we need to be able to quickly pivot as necessary to meet those needs. And that takes adopting a product versus a project mentality, right? Because we have to move away from that fixed capacity, fixed budget, fixed schedule, and understand that products evolve over time on a regular basis. Think about your Amazons, think about your Netflixes, right? Those are being updated on the regular, and in those cases on the daily, multiple times daily. I'm not saying that we have to get to that point, but at some point we have to understand that requirements change regularly, and taking a product approach over a project approach is going to serve us well in the government, right? So adopting organizational human-centered design is the approach. It takes a continuous learning culture, right? Because not everyone understands what that is, and that it's cyclical in its own right, and it stresses individual and organizational commitments to learning. And then it does often require some agile coaching, right? Until the processes become the new normal and are ready for automation, right? Once the processes have been defined, we've all adopted them, then it's easy to start to automate, and then we can start to build in quality sooner, right? Just for those that aren't familiar, and I won't spend a ton of time on this, if you look at human-centered design processes, they look similar to this. There's a a divergence as we discover, and then a convergence as we define. So we discover what's out there. We talk to customers. We talk to end users. We look at competitors if they exist, and we learn from them. And then we start to define what are the personas, what are the problem sets that we're trying to solve, what are the real requirements. Then we start to design and then prototype. And then after we've prototyped several times, we've tested those prototypes out with actual customers, then all of a sudden we can actually start to build something and implement something that's going to meet their needs. So let's talk about the responsibilities of the product manager, product owner, and Agile team. I borrowed this from Scaled Agile, only because it does a very nice job at a high level of kind of understanding the differences between the roles. Again, this doesn't mention the Scrum Master, but again, Scrum Master is the facilitator of all of this, and we love them. That said, product managers, they own the product backlog, and that's critical. They are the content authority on the program backlog or the big product backlog. They have to work with the business, they have to work with the customers so that they're building a backlog that can actually be built by the various development teams. They interface quite often with the customer as necessary, as well as the business owners. They own the vision, the roadmaps, right? Pricing, risk management, right? Return on investment, those type of things. And they can collaborate on enablers. Enablers are the things we don't have in the architecture that actually can help us scale over time. So if we don't have them, we have to plan for them, and we actually have to invest in them. So it's something for planning purposes that we have to take into consideration and not forget. We'll talk more a little bit about enablers in just a bit. That includes addressing technical debt and operational maintenance concerns. Product owners are way more tactical, right? They drive the iterations or the scrums, depending on what type of agile methodology you leverage. They own the team backlog, right? Or the sprint backlog, or the iteration backlog, depending on what methodology you're leveraging. They define iterations and stories. They contribute to the vision and the roadmap and return on investment. Reality is they're not responsible for it, but the product managers will often ask their product owners who are closer to the customers sometimes, as in terms of the way they're building the systems, for feedback to help them build a better, more robust vision and roadmap. And then ultimately they accept iteration increments, right? So in other words, they're there for the system demos. And I think this is where I've been involved in a lot of conversations with clients and coaching teams over the years that, when a team is doing a system demo and they don't have a client who isn't able to make it because they have another full-time job, they have to make assumptions, right? We're assuming we built what they expected. And when you have assumptions, you're introducing variability. When you're introducing variability, chances are we're going to have a lot of rework to do. So by participating in these system demos every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, depending on how long your iterations or sprints are, it is the product owner actually enables the team to make the right decision because they're prioritizing and reprioritizing on a regular basis. So the Agile teams, and in this case, I think it's what's really important, right? They're all about building out the system or building out the product the way, right? They build quality in, they evolve the architecture as necessary, they own their own estimates, right? And then they evolve the continuous delivery pipeline. In other words, as processes become robust, as they become consistent, then we can actually automate them. Right. And something to take about the Agile team, particularly from a scaled Agile perspective, is that Agile can be adopted across non-development teams as well. I've got great success across a number of agencies now, working with them to non-developers to implement Agile-like methodologies, taking a product management approach for them to be more successful because it gives them what they need to make better decisions by visualizing all the work that's being done, having them capture their backlogs, and ultimately helping them prioritize and reprioritize on a regular basis. So what does this look like from left to right? If the customer is on the far left, product manager, remember, interfaces with them the most. They're marketing customer focused. They're responsible for creating the vision and the roadmap, and not only creating it, but maintaining it and updating it regularly. On larger projects, you're going to have multiple product owners. Believe it or not, a best practice for product owners is one full-time resource per team. That said, it's not always a scalable model. So at most, a product owner should be assigned to 2 development teams, right? And you'll have anywhere from 2 to 4 Agile teams that are actually delivery focused. And I think walking away from this is, and you can see the product owner is typically co-located with the Agile teams, because the Agile teams are going to have questions all the time. And by having the product owner co-located, or in this case, easily accessible via some sort of video conferencing methodology, given what's been going on in COVID, makes it easier for the teams and reduces variability that we talked about, which then allows the teams to know they're focused on the right priorities at the right time. And the product owner provides that type of guidance to the team on a daily, ongoing basis. So they should be co-located and remember full-time roles. So there's some lean agile principles that may actually help aid product managers and owners within an organization that I'd like to kind of talk through. These apply to all the roles, but ultimately, I'm going to make it very specific to the product managers and owners. Taking an economic view, right? So there's still investments that need to be made. Assets evolve over time. Trade-offs need to be made, right? And we have to think about risk, cost of delay, operational costs. And that's really where the product manager lives, right? And so taking that economic view and understanding that we can't just make decisions in a vacuum, we have to understand the impacts of those decisions is key. Applying systems thinking, right? Just because we optimize an individual component of a system doesn't mean we're actually optimizing the entire system. And this applies to both organizations too. So for example, if we make investments in training product owners within a federal agency, but we don't commit to the product manager role, product owner role, but not optimizing the product management role. And this applies across the gamut, but it's something to take into consideration. So at the system level, if we're focusing in on optimizing, say, the front end, but we haven't optimized the back end, we haven't optimized the entire system. And chances are there are implications to the performance on the front end based on back end performance that has to be taken into consideration. We want to assume variability and preserve options. Requirements change. We have to make that assumption. They're going to change. They always change. We cannot possibly predict those changes. And we can't possibly say we know what our customers want. We need to talk to those customers. We need to develop multiple options. We actually need to trust our teams to develop multiple options and then decide from the options they provide. So that's a really big key case, right? And that's why cross-functional teams are so successful in organizations that adopt a product management, product ownership a product management type of methodology. We're going to build incrementally and fast integrated learning cycles, right? So as product owners and product managers, we want fast feedback. So therefore we want systems demos on the regular at the end of each iteration that aren't screen captures, that aren't PowerPoint slides, that are actually working software to some, right? So that we can assess what is working and what doesn't. This also includes integrations, right? If you have multiple integrations between systems, which often happens in the federal government, we want to make those integrations sooner than later, so we understand that where the possible bottlenecks are and where we might have some dependencies between teams. We want to base milestones on objective evaluation of working systems. I just said that. So visualize and limit work in progress, right? This is all about kind of understanding your backlog, visualizing your backlog using Kanban type techniques, right? Which is really about reducing the work in progress. And the Scrum Masters definitely help with this, right? We work with the teams to understand that human beings really aren't very good at multitasking. So we want them hyper-focused on the most highest priority items, right? We can put the processes in place, but the product owner has to tell us what those priorities are. We want to reduce batch sizes, right? Large batches or large jobs within a Kanban tend to sit there for long periods of time. We want to break those jobs up into smaller pieces so they start to move and flow through the system, and we can see signs of progress. And then ultimately, we want to manage queue lengths by reprioritizing as necessary on a regular, because that is what's going to make the team successful. We want to apply cadence synchronized with cross-domain planning. So on larger teams, that have interdependencies between teams, right? We want to make sure that each team, and I don't care if it's development teams or non-development teams, but if there's dependencies between them, we should be planning and executing on the same cadence. In other words, 2-week iterations, 3-week iterations, whatever your organization is kind of adopted, but also starting on the same day. So we're in cadence. So that when each team starts and ends on the same day, it allows us to plan as a group better together, identify, also allows us to integrate so that one team isn't waiting for another at any given time. And we can, as product owners and product managers, help manage identifying any of those integration points, those dependencies, and therefore manage risk. We want to unlock intrinsic motivation of knowledge workers. This is kind of a given. In other words, not only do we want to train ourselves, but we want to provide time for all our team members to provide input and to train and give them the autonomy and the purpose that they need so that innovation will ultimately blossom. And then we want to decentralize decision-making, right? So those closest to the problem are best suited to solve the problem. So in other words, the teams that are working on a problem usually can provide guidance to the product owners and the product managers in terms of how to fix a problem that's arisen. We want to listen to them and allow them to make the right decisions. And then lastly, organize around value. Customer centricity requires an understanding of the customer's journey and that journey never ends and it's always evolving. Therefore, we want to make sure we are re-engaging with our customers on an ongoing basis. All right, doing well. So coming full circle back to this little case study from the HHS I used it related to healthcare.gov, right? They talked about, again, the absence of clear leadership, the delays in decision-making, lack of clarity and prioritization, right? Failing to properly manage his key website development contractors, right? Poor coordination between policy and technical work, right? And they talked about Agile-based culture and working as one single team, and that's how they corrected it. And then the ruthless prioritization is what really turned things around for them. So what I wanted to do is come up with some product owner and manager success factors based on some of that, but also based on my own experience. So product management and product owners are full-time jobs, underlined and bolded on purpose. Own the leadership responsibilities, invest in the role. And I say invest in the role, I'm talking to federal agencies. My recommendation, a couple of years back now, to one of my clients was as they were about to send all of their government managers to Scrum Manager training, I highly recommended they pivot and take product ownership training because of the responsibilities they have as product owners on an ongoing basis. They had Scrum Masters, both government contractor folks as well as government managers that were already filling those roles. And I thought, and I recommended that, and they took it, and it was a big change for them, right? Because they understand the need to be involved on a day-to-day basis. They understand the need to prioritize and reprioritize for the team and make those decisions ultimately so that the team doesn't have to make assumptions and the variance actually subsides. So invest in the role. In other words, another thing I noticed was many of our particularly on the mission side, many of our government product managers and owners are have full-time other jobs, and we're doing this product owner, product manager on the side, so to speak. That's not a recipe for success. And in 21 years now of doing this, I can tell you that having dedicated PMs and POs are critical to the success of both small and large software projects. Make quick decisions based on fast feedback cycles by never missing a system demo. Another best practice is for those that ultimately are in charge of prioritizing, those product owners and those product managers and the people that play those roles. If they're at the system demo, they knows what works and doesn't work. They have to make sure that the teams are actually showing working software and not showing PowerPoints and screen captures. They have to hold them accountable as much as they need to be accountable to showing up and either accepting or not accepting the work and giving the team clear guidance on what has to happen next and what's the biggest priority. Break down the silos, embrace a one team culture. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Agile teams have fixed capacity and requirements will change. Ruthlessly prioritize and reprioritize the backlog regularly and understand and communicate the impacts to everyone, right? Their feedback actually may help you. So fixed capacity means every team has a X amount of developers, X amount of BAs, X amount of testers, designers, and what have you. They have the ability, right? They have the ability to get certain work done. That said, if we introduce new requirements and they had already committed to another set of requirements, something has to give because we can't continue to ask teams to over deliver or we'll burn them out. Addressing technical debt and maintenance activities, I talked about that earlier. You have to plan for it as much as you have to plan for new features, because if you don't address technical debt, the system will come to a grinding and screeching halt and will not scale over time. Therefore, plan for both as part of every iteration. I highly recommend product owners and product managers planning for enabler stories, as I like to call them, which are ensuring we are addressing technical debt, operation and maintenance activities as part of that capacity of the development team, so that, and new features as well, so that the system can evolve over time to meet customer needs as they evolve. And don't ever assume you know what the customer users want. Human-centered design is a continuous process that the product manager owns. It's not something you do once and set it and forget it. It's constantly interacting with the customers to understand how their needs have changed, and to understand how we can update the system to do so. And then adopt that continuous learning culture, because a learning culture is one that's always going to be prepared when customers' needs shift. And with that, I want to thank everyone, and I have some time, about 10 minutes for questions. So, product owner. So James, you asked, do you want to jump on and kind of explain your question, James, or you just want me to kind of go at it one by one? So product owner and managers are not customers. No, product owners and product managers represent customers. The customers are the actual users of the system. Product owners are those that are charged with building out a system that the customer can use based on their needs and the requirements that are captured. Product managers are responsible for interfacing with those customers through the human-centered design process. So they can solicit that feedback, get their input, show them new functionality, let them test out that functionality, provide that feedback so that we can actually start to get the new requirements we need. Because quite frankly, users often don't know what they're asking for when they ask for it until they can see it and touch it. They won't really necessarily understand what they're asking for. So getting those new requirements in, building them out, letting the customers actually try it on for size, and Agile allows us to do this using a product methodology. We can get feedback 2 weeks after we've actually built something to see if we've gone down the right path. If we haven't, we can pivot quickly without too much lost time. If we wait till the bitter end, say it's a 12-week build cycle, and we don't get that feedback until the very end, we may have gone down a path that's going to be much more painful and expensive to make those changes. So product owners and managers are not the customer. Elizabeth, it's a great session. I'd like to share the slides, and I will happily share the slides. I'm not sure what the process is, but I'll be glad to send them to you. Are there any other questions? And Elizabeth, a good question. Can you address when we have to build systems of record, like for a legacy mainframe system, so we can address the hard requirements yet be agile? So high-level requirements are something you still have to get right. Elizabeth, being agile means being able to pivot quickly. So understanding high-level requirements of a system, the limitations of the system, if it's a mainframe, like a legacy system, is critically important, and documenting all of those are going to be critically important, particularly if we're upgrading or dependent on them. If there's a legacy mainframe system and we're integrating with it, we have to capture the requirements. There are technical requirements, there are functional requirements we have to take into consideration in order to be able to interface with those mainframe systems. And the government's got lots of them that are still driving, 30-year-old mainframe systems that are driving a lot of government today. So you have to understand those hard requirements up front because they are very specific to a legacy system. However, the user's needs are really where we need to be more agile, right? Understanding that customer journey, understanding where they're interfacing with various systems as part of whatever process we've actually automated as part of their journey, and then understanding the systems that support that journey, right? And in value stream management, that's called operational value streams versus development value streams. Operational value streams are the value we bring to customers through the journey that they follow, that customer journey. So if you think about the end-to-end process of, say, filling out a FAFSA application, like my son and I have to do on a regular basis, as he attends college, he interfaces. The process is fairly well set. It's automated. He has various touch points with various systems as necessary for him to actually get the loan he needs. I'm part of that process as well. That's the operational value stream. Understanding those requirements are also key, right? Then we can get really deep into the development value streams, which are kind of the pillars that support that operational value stream. I'm sorry I don't have a picture of this, but ultimately those are the development value streams are the various systems that support various parts of the customer journey, and understanding the technical and functional requirements necessary to actually create that. Hopefully that to create that experience for that total experience for the customer. Hopefully that explains it a little bit. Oh, cool. Thanks, Kieran. It just came to me, quite frankly. Usually I use the loan. I use like a home loan type of thing, refinancing, but I wanted to give a government example. So, and I just literally did it with my son. So awesome. Awesome. Good luck to your kids in school for sure. Any other great questions? I really appreciate the interaction, everybody. Well, with that said, I can be reached at Bill Annabelle on Twitter, as I'm also Bill Annabelle on LinkedIn. Really, really excited to be able to have this conversation with you. And I appreciate everyone's participation, the great questions, and feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. Take care.